Once again, familiar acronyms. When looking at an entity, the infrastructure goes like this. There will be one overall entity that can have multiple locations. So you could have, for example, one community college. Let's pick on Quincy. We're going to do John Wood Community College. So there might be one entity of John Wood Community College, but there might be 10 locations where they are having classes at. The main campus, a satellite campus, an extra building, different, So you could have one entity with 10 locations, and then we look at just one of those locations could have multiple relationships, not only with your LWIA, but with multiple LWIAs. So John Wood Community College, located at 10 Main Street in Quincy, might have 12 relationships all by itself. And then John Wood Community College, located at 4500 Broadway, might have an additional 5 relationships of its own. So you have one entity that can have multiple locations, and each multiple location can have multiple relationships. Now, an entity, what is going on here? I can't see my own screen. There we go. Get that out of the way. Okay. What is an entity? An entity is a business or organization unit that has its own unique FEIN. So let's say we're talking about Walgreens. You could have 2 or more businesses with the same name of Walgreens, but different FEIN numbers. If they have a different FEIN number, then it should have a separate entity record. So that's the thing that you get down to. When you're looking at these different places, or even a John Wood Community College, the question of whether it's a new location for the entity or whether it's a new entity comes down to what FEIN number are they submitting to you. If it's a new FEIN that's different than the existing entity, then it's probably a new entity. A location is a geographical address from which the entity provides goods and services. One entity can have multiple locations that are all operating under the same FEIN number. Once again, we go back to our initial thing. John Wood Community College might have one FEIN with 10 locations for the different satellite classrooms or the different buildings. They might have, it could be that they're providing classes not only in Quincy, but they're doing it as far away as Barrie. They may have multiple locations. Western Illinois University out of Macomb would be a perfect example. It's going to have multiple satellite locations in other communities around the area. Lincoln Land Community College here in Springfield. I know for a fact they've got Lincoln Land Community College satellite locations in Beardstown and Litchfield. But they're all operating under the same FEIN. So the entity is single, the locations are multiple. The relationship is what allows a location to be a service provider for the LWIA. So if the switching examples, if the Lincoln Land Community College in Litchfield doesn't have a relationship with LWIA 20 to where they can provide services, then they're not going to show up in your dropdown. The location can have multiple relationships with the same LWIA or even with multiple LWIAs, like we discussed. You may have an LWIA that is on the border with other LWIAs, and that location may end up providing services for 3, 4, even 5 LWIAs. The relationship number is something you create, the local system administrator, when you create the relationship. It is a unique identifier that whatever filing system, whatever way you want to do it so that you know which relationship is which one, like this one's the NEG, this one's about DWG, this one's about the trade. If you want to break it down that way, then whatever naming convention you've got is the naming convention you're going to use. We're not picky, it's all on you. The IWDS user roles needed, because not all local system administrators are going to have the rights or the job duties of dealing with the entities, locations, and relationships. You may have a local system administrator that's only dealing with IWDS client screens. That's fine, that's great, however you guys want to break it down. But you need to have at least one local system administrator that's responsible for the entities, locations, and relationships. They have to have the following roles. You need to have the entity maintenance role. It's going to give you the ability to add or edit the entity, the location you're going to use. We're not picky, it's all on you. The IWDS user roles needed, because not all local system administrators are going to have the rights or the job duties of dealing with the entities, locations, and relationships. You may have a local system administrator that's only dealing with IWDS client screens. That's fine, that's great, however you guys want to break it down. But you need to have at least one local system administrator that's responsible for the entities, locations, and relationships. They have to have the following roles. You need to have the entity maintenance role. It's going to give you the ability to add or edit the entity, the location, the contact, and the relationships. You have to have the entity maintenance assigned training function included. It will allow you the ability to assign a training function to a location in addition to add, edit entity, location, contact, relationship. And then you need to have the LWA relationship manager. I know it's LWIA now, but we're going all the way back to when the system went live in either 2000 or 2001. Back then it was LWA, not LWIA, and it's hard coded, so we can't change it. So you're going to see in the user roles, you're going to see some things that may not be up to date on the acronyms. But LWA Relationship Manager allows you to add or edit relationships. So if you're the person in charge of entities, locations, and relationships, these roles have to be on your IWDS user role. So we're going to go quickly through this. We're going to create an entity, we're going to add a location, we're going to add a contact, and we're going to add a relationship. Now, adding a contact, we're going to briefly kind of discuss about training programs, because the contact is the person who submits training programs for their location that are up to you to approve. And I don't deal with training programs. That's the WEO performance measure staff. That's going to be Paula Berry and Mark Burgess. So, creating an entity. On the IWDS screen, there is a whole section that comes up when you give yourself that role for entity information. Before entering the entity, you need to, once again, just like entering a brand new client, you're going to look for and search for the entity. There are 4 ways to search for an entity: the entity name, the FEIN, Social Security number if it is a sole proprietorship or something that uses the owner's SSN instead of a FEIN, and the agency type, which is a drop-down menu with the following choices. I suggest looking for it by the FEIN in one search and looking by the entity name in the other. And once again, we start talking about the partial name, because you don't know exactly how they're going to be entered by. And also, I mentioned searching by the FEIN. You could have a place that is DBA, doing business as. Like, for example, in Springfield, McGraw owns almost all the McDonald's. So the DBA is McDonald's, but the entity is actually McGraw. So anyway, we're looking for a company that's going to be named, go back here and find the full name. We're going to call it the Timely Business Company. So we're going to look for, I typed in Timely, Timely. Now, once again, we're talking about, you could have some spelling errors. So TI returns anything that starts with TI. TIM would return anything starting with TIM. TIME would return, etc. So if you did TI, it's going to return Tim. If you did, it's also going to return time and tire and timberline. But if you type in TIMLEY, it's only going to return things that start with TIMELY. So if it got misspelled as TIMLEY, you're not going to find it. That's where searching by the FEIN comes in. But just keep in mind your partial name search is going to return everything you've typed in plus additional letters. So when we searched for timely, we had no results. I still recommend searching by the FEIN number because it will give you a second way of looking for it just in case it's got a DBA. But I don't have anything about that in the screens here. So we know it's not here. We're going to click Add Entity. Anything marked with a red, just like every other screen in IWDS, is required. OET recommends entering as much information as you have because it can always be used to help differentiate between entities that have the same name. So if you have a bunch of Walgreens or a bunch of McDonald's, some of this extra information here will help differentiate between them. You could have multiple entries for John Wood Community College because you may have something for the vocational side, something for this other side, etc. The more information you enter here, the more it helps you differentiate between the two entities if there are multiple entities of the same name. So we are entering Timely Business Company. We do not have a DBA on this company. They have an FEIN number. They are a business. And that is the minimum requirement for us to create an entity. So we're going to go ahead and click Next. And it takes us to the Add Location screen. So now, this little informational message up here says this record has been added. You now have created an entity. Woohoo! Step one is done. Now, we have to have at least one location for the entity where they are actually doing business. So, we are going to go over here. Once again, we have the reds that are required. The location information is going to include the location name, which could be completely different from the entity name. You could have the entity of Timely Business Company, but their location, and this is different than a DBA, the location might be something else. It might be that they are the Timely Watch Company, because that's what this location does. But that's, you're going with the name of the location. Then you've got the geographical address. This is not looking for a web address or anything like that. You don't want to do the address of the actual entity home location for the corporate office. We want to know if we dropped a pin trying to pinpoint on Google Maps where we're going to get to this place, we want the address. Then we want the actual city where they're located, same, from the geographical address, state, zip. You don't have to do the zip +4. You can do the find zip code here to do that. Sometimes, just doing the 5-digit zip code's enough. But in the county where the geographical information's at, you get down here to the phone. We want the actual phone number entered for the location, not the corporate office entity level. Then down here, you want to turn around and say whether or not the location is accessible to people with disabilities. Is it ADA accessible? Then down here, what type of business functions and human services, which is down here. We'll have to click another button for that. We'll do that in a second. But what business functions are they offering? Are they doing career services, job placement, outreach, training? Are they serving youth? Are they doing OJT, etc.? Now, we're going to click that Human Services button here in a minute. So once we've filled everything else out, we're going to use the address where I'm actually sitting, 500 East Monroe Street for DCEO. Springfield, Illinois, 62701, Sangamon County. Phone number, that's my actual office number here. Then we say it's career services, job placement, training, OJT, and youth. Now we're going to look at the select view human services if they provide any. So we're going to click that button. And now you have all this. It's a pretty long, lengthy screen. Each column here ends up going under each other on the actual screen itself. So you can see why it wouldn't fit on one slide up and down vertically. So we're going to select all services that apply to this location and then click View List when we're done. So in this first section, all services selected will be listed. So I have selected some things that I'm going to say that this location does. They're doing business development, child care resource, daycare, clothing and grooming, household, thrift, and then I'm going to click View List. When I click View List, this is what comes up, and it's going to say that, click on the Accept List button to confirm your changes. If you need to make any changes to add or remove items, click Edit List. Don't click Accept, click Edit, go make your changes, and then when you're completely done and you're happy with your list, then you click Accept List. Then we get back here to the location, and it's going to list these human services right down here at the bottom. You can see it's listing, and it says more because it's got more than what the display will allow. So to review all information, click Next when you are happy, and IWDS will take you to the Add Contact screen. Once again, up here at the top, it says the record has been added. Congratulations, you've now added a location. So now you have an entity and a location for your company. Now you have to list a contact. You don't have to, but it's strongly recommended, especially if this company is going to be entering training programs, because the contact is the person who will be getting their own login for the public side to enter training programs. You could have, I've seen the most contacts I've ever seen for an entity, for a location, is 21. A little excessive, but that place was rolling over, and there's a way to mark them as active or inactive. We'll get to that in a minute. So don't be afraid of how many contacts you put in there, or if it updates and this place is every year somebody new's in charge, it happens. So the user is going to enter at least one contact for the location. The entity should identify their location contact to the user. You shouldn't have to guess, including what contact will be the one responsible for running training programs if needed. So to add a contact, we click Add Contact. The IWDS will then take the user to the Search Contact screen. Note, we're not requiring a contact for the location. If there's no contact information recorded, then the local system administrator, you, will be responsible for running any training programs for this location. So you can always skip this step by selecting Return if you don't have any contacts to add. But like I said, if you don't enter a contact, then you're responsible for doing anything that involves this entity or this location. So we're now on the Search Contact screen. The first step, once again, they kind of want you to look, see if this person's already in here somewhere as a contact on another location or entity. So we're going to search for existing contacts. You're going to enter any of the following information in the fields and click Search. Since this entity location was just created, we're going to have to create the contact info. So more than likely, we're not going to find the person we're looking for. But if you were entering a new location for a place that's already existing, you might find that if you enter in the first name of John Doe, or John Doe's email address, or something similar, that when you search, you may find they're already in here, and you just need to pick them to add it to this new location. So we are adding a contact of Jane Jetson. And any of the fields marked red are required. So I filled in Jane Jetson. I added her title because I knew it. It was CEO, they told me. I gave her email because I've argued that this should be a required field, but so far we have not made it required for the email or the phone number. But you're going to want that information, especially if they're going to be responsible for entering in training programs. I would just make it required in as far as your LWIA practices to get this information. So Jane Jetson at tbc.com, physical address, physical city, physical state, physical zip code, and county. And then I got the phone number and extension so that if I ever need to get hold of her, I know how. She is the primary contact for the location, which means that if you were entering another contact who's not the primary, you could always say no here. So you could have the one primary contact and 9 other contacts at that location that aren't the primary. And then the status is active. Now, once again, if this person were to leave Timely Business Company, then we would make them inactive, and then we'd pick someone else for the primary contact based on what the location tells us. Now, if we're adding more than one, this is the main contact for this location. Keep that in mind. We're not talking about the overall entity. We're talking about 500 East Monroe Street. If more than one contact has been provided by the company for this location, click Save and Add Another. And when you're completely done adding everybody, you're going to click Save and Return. Down here, you have Human Service Provider and ITA Training Provider. That's going to determine what this person's able to do, whether they're going to be able to pick and choose Human Service Provider stuff or ITA or both. Now, when I've added this person, it now says record's been added. Congratulations, you've made your first contact. Now, once the contact has been saved, the IWDS username login ID has been assigned to the entity on the IWDS public side login. It's not provided on this page. You have to go back into the contact to see it. So you're going to click View to take a look. And just so that you know about it, this is what the public side URL looks like. They're not going to log in at the blue and red screen. They're going to this blue and orange one. So you would provide the location, the contact person, when you give them their ID, you're going to want to give them this public side URL. Now, when you click into creating the contact, right here at the very bottom is the username that was created. So it created J Jetson for Jane Jetson. It's very similar. It's the exact same logic as creating an IWDS case manager record. Then if your contact is going to be entering training programs into IWDS for the LWIA to approve or deny, this is their login ID. And this reset password, you as the local system administrator, if they need their password reset, this is where you do it. So let me go back here. So at the bottom of the view contacts, it shows the username and it shows the reset password button, just like I was pointing out. And we go over here and you click the reset password in order to reset the password. The password reset comes at the very top in an informational message in the yellow box. You can either copy paste, like highlight and do a copy, or you can do a screenshot like I did right here to capture this information and send it to the user. I recommend, if this person is going to be entering training programs, you send them the public side URL and tell them that the login screen should always be blue and orange. You send them their username and you send them the first time their brand new user password because it's not provided otherwise. So you're going to have to click reset password at least one time to get the password for them to log in. So you can click add contact again from the list contact screen if you need to add a new person, or if this, let's say you deactivate this person because Jane Jetson left and now Elroy's there, then you would add contact to create Elroy Jetson and make him the primary. Now, we are going to be happy with Jane Jetson because it's a brand new. Now we're going to click List Relationships over here in the blue section to take a look at any relationships that the entity and that the location has attached to it. In this case, they're not going to be any because it's a brand new location. But if it's an existing one, you could have pages of existing relationships. So we have a brand new, clean, there are no relationships because it's a brand new location. Newly created entities and locations will not have any existing relationships between them and any LWIA. You're going to click Add Relationship, and it's going to take you to the Search Location screen. Because when you're creating a brand new relationship, you have to pick which location you're having the relationship with. So we're going to search for the location, and you can use any of the criteria here to search. Obviously, you're going to want to make sure you're looking at your LWIA if this is where you put the location, but you can do something as simple as the entity name with a partial. You can do the physical address of the location you're looking for. Whatever makes you happy and gets you the results that you need to get. In my case, I'm doing timely because I'm the one who created the entity and location. I know this is how I'm going to find it. I type in timely. So I do a partial name search under entity name, and I'm going to click search down at the bottom. It brings up a location. It has a match. I know this location with this address is the one that I want to create the relationship with. So I'm going to click the Pick button. That brings us to Provider Management Update Basic Information screen, which is where you're going to have, you make up your own relationship number, select the relationship type, and you're going to have to enter at least one fund source with a start date and an end date for what title they're going to be providing services in. You don't have to enter anything in the contract amount. Matter of fact, I recommend you don't. So I made up a thing here, which is, in my case, I use a date naming convention. I do this when I create LWIA 90 relationships. You can always do this date or that number or that whatever, and then increment it 01, 02, 03. I mean, whatever makes you happy and you understand it. So when creating the relationship number, it needs to be a unique identifier using alphanumeric characters. You're not going to be able to put a question mark or a pound sign. That stuff's not going to fly. Select your relationship type, contract, other, referral, or vendor. And once you've done that, we're going to scroll down to get to the fund source grant information. So down here, I'm entering this fund source of 1A, WIOA, with a start date of them being able to provide services on 1/1/21. And my current grant that I'm entering it from, I like to use the grant end date for whatever end date, because that way there, we know what our, whatever the contract is, whatever makes the most sense. But in this case, I know that their 1A grant ends on 6/30/22. So I'm going to use that because it just makes sense. And you can pick whatever fund, 1A, 1D, 1E, 1N, trade, 1DC, 1EC, etc. As long as it's in the fund source drop down and you've got that's the grant that you've got, there you go. So you could end up having multiple fund sources, a lot of multiple fund sources, and you could even have a gap in your time. Like, let's say there's a 1A grant that runs from 1/1/21 to 12/31/21, and it ended. And then then there's a gap in there, and it doesn't pick up again until 6/30. You would create a new line because you want to keep the gap. Now, let's say the grant gets renewed. You can always come in and just update the end date to keep it going. I've seen some that have a start date of 7/1/2005, and their end date runs through 2024 right now. I mean, because the grant they keep having grants. So it's completely plausible and possible. Once saved, you can never change the start date again, which is why, like I said, you can always do multiple lines of 1A, but if you've got a gap situation, but you can always change the end date. The end date can always be updated to be greater than the current end date, but it can never be less than. If for some reason you need to make it less than, that's going to be a modification request. You just kind of, in this case, that's not really a monitoring one. That's going to be one that you email either me or Jim Potts, and you explain what's going on and give us some screenshots and be as thorough as you can so we can go into the correct relationship and submit documentation to the programmers to make the change.
Chris, this is
So you can always make the end date bigger, but not smaller.
Hey Chris, it's Molly. I think we have this session going until 11:45. I'll double check if I'm incorrect, but I just wanted to give you a heads up.
Yeah, I'm trying like crazy. I'm trying to cram 9 hours into 2.5.
No worries.
So,
I just wanted to give you a heads up.
Yeah, I'm going as quick as I can. All right. So anyway, if the grant's extended, the local system administrator can always change the end date to extend the relationship with this particular entity location for the selected fund source line. You'll just need to make sure you're changing each line that's effective. A user can always enter a start date that's in the future. So like if you know you've got a grant coming up, but it hasn't started yet, like this one here, let's say we got a 1Y grant that's starting on 12/1 of 21. You know, when I did this in March, that was a lot farther in the future than it is now. You can enter the future grant period coverage for the relationship and services ahead of time. In this case, this 1Y grant is going to start on December 2021. Even though they are entering the fund source of the future date, this part of the relationship won't be effective until the services happen within the date range that's provided for the start and end date. So if they try to enter a service under 1Y and try to pick this as a provider and the service start date is 11/30, they're not going to show up. They're only going to show up after 12/1. So once you're happy with the fund sources you've picked and the start dates and the end dates, you're going to go click Add Program Activities at the bottom. And then clicking Add Program Activities, you're going to choose the titles that are affected to add services to the relationship. So in this case here, we're going to click Add Program Activities. We go in here. Now, I know we've got some old terminology here, like registration required core services and intensive. You just have to ignore those. We're not able to hide that. That's the way things were in previous WIOA. We know now it's career and training, and those are the only services you're going to find. So if you accidentally put something under registration required core services, it's not going to hurt anything, but it's not going to show up either. So in this case, we are picking 1A career, 1A training, 1D career, 1D training, and 1Y, because those are the three titles we entered. So it comes up and then it's asking you to verify that this is what you're doing. In this case, we're happy with those 5 choices. We're going to click Save. Now we go into 1A career, and we are going to pick each one of these services that are going to be a service allowed by this grant that they're going to be a provider for. So I've picked several options here. These are the ones that this particular provider is going to be allowed to do. And once I've done those and I'm happy with this for 1A career services, I click Next. Now I'm in 1A training, and I do the same thing. I pick the ones that I want. When I'm happy, I click Next. Now I'm in 1D career, and it's going to go in the same order that it was on the initial screen. It's just going to keep rolling right on through. So I pick the ones I want in 1D career, 1D training, and then the ones that I want for 1Y. Then once I've filled in all the gaps here, it's going to give me this summary screen where it says, this is what is picked under 1A career, this is 1D career, 1A training, 1D training, and 1Y. If I'm happy with my choices and I'm ready to go, I click Next. If I want to change any of the different sections, I click the Update button for that section. So I click that, and I end up at the Provider Management Update SIP codes. Office of Employment and Training does not recommend putting any SIP codes in the relationship. It can cause some issues with the inner workings. Just don't do it. It's not worth the hassle. The rest of the stuff takes care of itself on the services screens. So leave the SIP code section of the relationship blank. Now we go into the relationship summary. Boom, here's everything we've done so far. Status is pending because we haven't clicked activate yet. It's a contract location. It was created on this date by this user. Here's the fund sources. Here's your start dates and end dates. We left the amounts blank because, once again, this is something that years ago they wanted. We don't really need it filled in now. You have 5 programs because you have 1A career and training, 1D career and training, and 1Y. There's your 5. And you selected 43 different activities between the 5 programs. If you're happy with everything, you're going to click activate to accept and turn on the relationship. It has now changed to active status, which says that the entity location will now be available as a provider choice in the selected services and the selected titles during the selected date period. So basically, if your client service is one of the fund sources selected and the start date of the service is between the start date and the end date, then it's going to show up as a provider choice if it's one of the activities you selected. So there's a lot of criteria here, but it's title, date, activity. If those 3 things don't match up, you're not going to find your provider, and those are the 3 things you go look at in the relationship to see if you've got something wrong. So here's an example of how the provider appears in a client services. We're going to open a service in our test client of Briar Rose. My daughter loves Sleeping Beauty. Sue me. So here we go. We've got an example. We're clicking 1A. This person's already got some career services, so we're picking a training service with a start date of 1/25/21. We're going to click next. We get in here. We're making an occupational skills training. We select whether it is ITA funded or contract funded. In this case, we're saying it's ITA and it's not contract, so yes and no. We're going to click next. Now we're on the service, the add required activity information. We fill in all this information. We select our grant. It's not green. Here's our SIP. Here's our ONET. Open 12 weekly hours. We're going to click search providers. This is the thing we're looking for. If you click show all, it's going to bring up every relationship with your LWIA that meets your criteria of title, type of service, the activity selected within your date range. So I click show all. You can always do something different and look for a specific relationship number and click search. I just think the show all is easy. I click show all. I may have 5 pages to go through and it only gives you 3 at a time. I wish it gave you more. But show all lists the providers in alphabetical order and we start looking through. And as we're going, we find on page 4, there's Timely Business Company. There's the relationship number that we created. And we're going to pick that provider with the correct relationship. Because you might have multiple hits of the same provider with different relationship numbers if that's the way that you set it up. So I picked that provider. It comes up. It puts the relationship number and the name of the provider on the service record. So the service was in the relationship, in the right title, and in the right correct active date range. If your provider is not showing up in the services, these are the things you go in and look for. You look to make sure that that title is on your relationship. You go to make sure that your date range is right and that you've actually selected the service as being one that they can provide. Maintaining LWIA relationships in IWDS. Each LWIA across the state should have at least one local system administrator that has the responsibility of maintaining provider-entity relationships. Those local system administrators should establish and maintain their own schedule for updating the relationship end dates. Different ways to do it. Some people do end of program year, scheduling toward the latter part of June every year and making sure all their relationships that are scheduled to be end in the next 12 months get updated. Some people do end of calendar year. They love to do it the week between Christmas and New Year's when work is slow and nobody's bugging them. I get it. So, once again, you check to make sure all your relationships are done. Some people like to do it. I've heard from some LWIAs. They do it twice a year. Every 6 months, they update review half of their relationships, some in June and some in December. And I've had at least one tell me that they do it quarterly, where at the end of every quarter, they update review that portion of their relationships. You do you. Whatever you can handle and you can do, that's how it's done. You may have more than one local system administrator. Maybe the two of you split it. As long as you're doing it, that's all we care about. Because if you don't keep up with it, then you're going to have problems when you go to enter your services. There's no required direction from Office of Employment Training for maintaining those relationship end dates to ensure the relationship stays current, but it's something that each local system administrator who is assigned the responsibility for the provider entity relationships must keep the information up to date. If the LWA does not maintain the relationships, you run the risk that they will expire, and that will restrict your various career planner staff from being able to record the services on the client records. And if you need assistance, the DCO contacts, the IWDS support would be Jim Potts and Chris Tylen. And if you're looking for things with performance measures, you're going to contact Mark Burgess or Paula Berry. I am going to take a look and see if we have any questions in the chat. I am sorry I kept you guys open. I went as fast as I could. Let me roll up here. So, Gabby, send me an email about the not being able to add a new contact for the training provider. We'll take a look and see if that's something that's specific to LWS 7, or maybe you're missing a role. Kirsten did a wonderful job, and now Molly's on here. Sounds good. Molly, this particular slideshow is not going to need any updates, so we can go ahead and just post the entity location relationship PowerPoint that you've already got, and it'll be fine. And all right, and Josh, I understand completely that you have another meeting, so if you need any assistance, you know to contact me. And Cynthia Lehman, if there isn't a SIP code, doesn't that affect the CP enrolling someone? You don't need the SIP code in the relationship. If you put a SIP code in the relationship, then it's going to specifically look for that SIP code and that SIP code only. And if there's an update to the SIP codes, or if there's ones that are related to it, it's not going to pull them. So what it does is it restricts what IWDS system is looking for. So we do not recommend putting the SIP codes in the relationships because it limits what the system will look for. We put the SIP code in the service, and we do it that way. It's still there. I know some people want to do it, but I'll be honest with you, in the last 10 years, 11 years that I've been here, we've actually removed the SIP codes from relationships in order for things to function. And we don't really know what's going on with the programming. We had them spend several hours trying to figure out why. And the only thing we could come up with was that it was restricting the data flow. So we just want you to enter the SIP code on the actual service itself. All right. I think that covers everything. Obviously, you guys know if you need any assistance, I'm always here. I respond fairly quickly if I'm going to be out of the office for an extended period of time. I put a automatic reply on there telling you guys to get a hold of Jim Potts or Paula or whoever's covering for me while I'm gone. Jim does the same thing when he's going to be out. He just got back from Hawaii, lucky stiff. So, I'm more than happy to let him pull the weight if you guys want to bug him, especially any eligibility type questions. But this ends the presentation where we are right now. I know I went fairly quickly, but it was mainly to hit the 6 brand new local system administrators and provide a refresher for any existing local system administrators that may have picked up some new duties. So that said, you guys have the PowerPoint, you have the supporting documentation. This is going to get posted, and thank you all for your time. And I hope it was helpful.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
All right, Molly, we can stop the recording and we're good to go.
All right, bye-bye.
Thanks.